What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Hawks Room podcast, hosted by yours truly, David Lee, aka DLee43. If you're enjoying the show, please make sure you like, subscribe on YouTube, share it, add it to your podcast feed on whatever your podcast feed of choice is. I also just launched a Substack. I would love for any support on there. It'll be like my more written, long form content, articles, deep dives, film breakdowns. The things that I would be putting on Twitter that I can get a little bit more in depth onto. My 30 teams, 30 days preview is on there right now. They're all enhanced with more findings, more graphs, more statistics, more breakdowns. Yes, so I definitely would appreciate any support on there. But without further ado, let's talk about these Hawks, man. Unfortunately, I just recorded this episode already, but StreamYard, which honestly I should have been checking, it's not entirely on the platform, but I connected my AirPods, but I didn't actually record the audio. So I'm gonna try to maintain that same fire, that same passion that I had from that first take. The Hawks did not have a great opening to the season. When you get blown out at home in the first game of the season, morale is going to be low. Hawks lost by 20. They basically got outscored overall by the same margin that they got outscored from on fast break points. To give you all some pertinent statistics, the Hawks allowed 86 points in the paint. Of those 86 points in the paint, 36 of them came in transition per Caitlin Cooper. The Raptors racked up 27 hit-ahead passes. A hit-ahead pass is when you start a transition opportunity off a pass. That's their season high from last year. The Hawks only gave up 35-plus transition points 4 times last year, 2024, 2025. Of the 39 points in transition, 35 were in the paint. There is a problem that the Hawks are going to have to solve. I got a message from my guy, Kenneth. He DM'd me on Twitter. He said, "Hey, man, love the content. Something I'm disappointed in is the lack of acknowledgement of how we struggled with Toronto last year as well." He asked if/when I do my next podcast, can you touch on why we seem to struggle with them specifically and why the Jalen/offseason additions didn't affect it at all, at least within the one-game sample. Shout out Kenneth, because if I didn't read this message and I would have recorded this and didn't get the audio, I may have not come back for the second time, but I got to make sure that I address this question because I think it's a great question. Toronto was 3-1 against us last year. They've consistently given the Hawks problems. So what is it about Toronto in particular? What is it about the Hawks? Well, Toronto is an extremely physical, lengthy, athletic team. What are the Hawks? At least before last year, very small, not as lengthy, not as athletic. And sometimes it boils down to just that. But in particular, the Raptors are a very aggressive defense, and they play very well in the passing lanes. And so when you add in the athletic disadvantages and the length disadvantages with their aggressive scheme and their ability to get out in transition, you get what happened tonight. And so the Hawks got outworked on the glass. They got outworked getting back in transition. And they already had a strength disadvantage, and that's what leads to a really embarrassing loss. I mentioned Toronto, I mentioned Orlando, and I mentioned OKC as really good litmus tests for this team going into the beginning of the season. I said this preseason because these teams are all similar in those same aspects. They're really heavy gap defenses, which means they sit and they help off of off-ball players that are away from the ball because they can recover with their length and athleticism. They're very aggressive. Toronto was full court pressing pretty much the entire game. Not in a more traditional sense, but more so enforcing other people besides Trey to bring the ball up. Sometimes it worked in the Hawks' favor, sometimes it didn't. This particular game, y'all know I like to record the majority of the games to get all the possessions. With the way that my stream was dropping and with the way the game went, I only have a couple clips. And I didn't save these clips because I didn't save all the clips. So I'm like, it's taking up space and it's a bad showing. So we'll go through the very few clips that I have saved. Then we'll go through the old-fashioned way on NBA.com, run through a couple clips that I had in my notes. We'll wrap it up, and hopefully the Hawks can improve on these things before they play Orlando tomorrow. So without further ado, let's get into the film. All right. Yes, let's go ahead and get started. I want to start with this stretch from the new guys that should give you some optimism. Hawks fans in general, but anyone, right? So Toronto's setting up double drag here, essentially. Double drag is a screening action where you have one player set the initial screen on the ball. So here's this initial screen on the ball. Then you have another player, usually a big, screen that player who's defending the player on the ball. What this usually does against teams is it makes it tougher for them to pass off and switch assignments. It makes it harder to switch because obviously if the guard is setting the initial screen, you don't want Trae Young switching on the Jakob Poeltl. I think the Hawks did a pretty good job stifling this action. You're going to see KP stunt very aggressively, which allows Zach to get back in front of the ball and play this passing lane. And then you have Trae sitting here if Emmanuel decides to send it back this way, and then Jalen is going to be playing too. So you got a Raptors player over here, and then you have Jakob here. So they negate that first action. Good job from Zach to be in the passing lane to force that pass to come a little bit later to Poeltl, and then KP's there to step that down. You're going to see Nickeil smartly dig, then be able to recover back out to RJ Barrett. Look at the technique here where he's able to still keep his chest square to the ball when he recovers, so he doesn't give up an immediate driving angle. Beats RJ to the spot here, boom, cuts him off. Now, here's the big thing. Notice how RJ is going to go for the bump, but I want you to pay attention to how Nickeil is meeting him with that bump first. So he's bumping him before he bumps him. Sometimes it can be called a defensive foul, but I think he did a really good job standing him up. Hawks go the other way, gang rebound, which they didn't do all night, but they did on this possession, which is important. And then they're able to get the ball going the other way. Nickeil snags the board. Trey's going to bring the ball up the floor. Now, here, you've got Grady Dick guarding at the point of attack. Trey knows he has a bit of an advantage. When Jakob takes that one step towards him, he fires that pass without looking at KP. I want you to notice how quickly flies at Kristaps Porzingis here because he's worried about this pass. And then KP, that's too much space. He knocks down the deep three. At this point, I was like, oh, maybe the Hawks can get back into it. They're playing a little bit better. At this point, okay, now quickly's going to walk the ball up the floor. They're going to look into getting an off-ball screen for RJ Barrett here to get him going downhill. At this point, you can see Nickeil being aggressive on the ball. They're going to set this screen for Emmanuel Quickley to cut to this space, to flare out. When RJ gets a step on Nickeil here, even though he's still on his hip, KP does a really good job forcing him to stop, which then gives Nickeil the ability to knock it off his foot, and it's forced that turnovers. Nickeil is hyped up. Hawks have some momentum that they weren't, unfortunately, able to carry after the break. We'll get into that a little bit later. Let's talk about KP's three-point gravity. You will notice that there are a lot of variability in the ball handlers, so I thought Dyson did a good job drawing two here. While Toronto is very lengthy and active, they're not always disciplined. There's really no need for both these guys to be this deep on Dyson. It creates an easy advantage for KP to exploit. Watch how you get 1, 2 guys making a beeline to KP because he's that dangerous even behind the hash mark. Again, this is 28 feet. He's spotting up for 28 feet. When he's so far, he demands a far closeout. It's an easy bounce pass to Zach, who fumbles it a little bit. I was worried about them being able to capitalize on his advantage, but he's able to make a hook shot. It wasn't exactly pretty, but it went in. Here's Nickeil in some early offense off a rebound. I love that he pushed the pace here. He's going to get to a spin. He's going to manipulate Scotty Barnes here. So he's looking at the corner at Jalen here, which gets Scotty to make one step that way, anticipating the pass that way. Jalen goes back door, and Hawks get an easy 2 points. Now, in general, I don't think the Hawks ran enough set offense. Now, one thing I'm working on to enhance the podcast, my film breakdowns overall, I want to start charting their plays. I want to start categorizing, okay, this is out of a freelance set where they're just running motion, they're just dribble driving. This is a horn set, which would be with 2 bigs at the elbows, whatever it may be. And hopefully by then, as I can build up that archive and that database, then I can say, okay, when the Hawks run horns out of sideline, out of bounds, they score this point per possession, So that way I can give you guys a more informative look at the game outside of just calling out particular plays. I can actually give you a historical precedent throughout the season. So that's something I'm working on. I don't have just yet. So I don't exactly have the categorization for this play, but I can tell you the alignment. So anytime you see the ball enter to the big, usually it'll be right here. Onyeka kind of got pushed out a little bit, but this is pinch. So pinch is where you're going to be running cutting actions with the big man as a hub. So what's the benefit of this action? Well, you're going to see Nickeil set a really solid screen on RJ Barrett here. This is relevant because this is Jamison Battle. You don't want Jamison Battle switching on the Jalen Johnson. So what they're going to have happen, they're going to pass off assignments. They're going to try to have RJ switch on the Onyeka and Mogbo switch on the Jalen. But the benefit for the Hawks here, they're trying to clear out this area. They want to post up for Onyeka. And so this is a really smart way to clear out the floor. You're going to see Keaton Wallace lift at the same time, which makes it harder for Ochai to dig, although I probably would have still if I was Toronto respectfully. And they're able to get an easy post up. So really nice offensive execution from the Hawks here on this organized offense. It was one of the few times I felt like they executed a set cleanly outside of some pick and roll stuff that we'll get into. But I want to call this out because the more they can play through their bigs, the more they can minimize turnovers, the more they can get better on transition defense because usually it will be a big getting back. And the more varied they can be on offense. So good to see this. Wanted to see more of this. Didn't exactly see it in this game. Hopefully they'll be able to continue to build and add to the repertoire throughout the season. Let's start with the film on NBA.com. The Raptors, as you can see, were very aggressive. They've got 2 players keyed in on Trae Young with 30 minutes to go, 30 seconds into the game. Now, one of the consequences of doing this, and this did burn the Raptors sometimes, was not guarding the inbounder. It allows Jalen Johnson to get ahead of steam. So would have loved to have seen KP get a little bit more contact on there, but it's fine. because now you get Jalen Johnson getting downhill and he got to the free throw line. If there's one big bright spot for the Hawks, they were able to get to the free throw line a ton. Now, the refs in general were calling a lot, so I don't really know how to rate their free throw rate, but from what we can tell, it's pretty good. Now, I mentioned the live ball turnovers. It's hard to tell whether RJ actually gets a hand on this or not, or if Dyson just loses it. But regardless, I mean, there was one of the big benefits you get from Trey running everything, of course, is that he minimizes turnovers for everyone else. When you start putting the ball into other people's hands, sometimes you get more turnovers. It's a trade-off that they're going to have to figure out the right balance for. I think that there could have been a little bit more of Trey on the ball. I don't have the particular numbers game by game, but his usage rate was lower than Nikhil. So kind of an example of how little he was directly involved into the offense, even though usage rate is more so a function of where the possession ends, not how much someone's involved in the offense. They don't really release those things publicly. One day they will, hopefully. But this is a good example of how bad the transition defense was. All right, so here's the turnover. I think Trey gets back. Cool. KP gets back. What KP doesn't do is be the lowest man on the floor. As a big, you have to get to the paint first, even in this three-point heavy era. And he just has no visibility that Trey's by himself. I don't see Trey ask for help. I don't see anyone make any sort of effort to try and prevent this from happening, which if KP is lower here, he possibly can. And then if let's say KP's lower, they don't throw this pass, now they throw it to Brandon Ingram, they scream. Now you have Jalen Johnson defend that instead of KP and have KP rotate back over to RJ Barrett. But this is the problem with transition. The reason why the Hawks defense was so much better in the half court than it was in transition was because they kept getting cross matches like this and weren't doing anything about it, or they weren't just getting back at all. Their half-court defense was actually relatively good. They held the Raptors at a 98 points per possession in the half-court. The average half-court possession is worth 96.96, okay? But you can't do this. And Trey does what he can in this, which is try to grift and draw a foul, and he's not able to get it, and it's 2 points. But the Hawks could have just played better defense, and he wouldn't have had to do that, okay? In general, Trey's defense wasn't great, though. I will say that. Now, I thought Zach gave effort against BI. There's another clip that's a better example of how much he kind of struggled. Love seeing Jalen push the ball up the floor. I think, unfortunately, this gets cut off, but this turns into an open three for Zach after Trey drives and gets to the cup. Here is a dunk generated for Onyeka Okongwu off of Jalen Johnson. Jalen had a number of fantastic passes. Here's a benefit of having a guard screen for Jalen, of course. He can just sort of get past them. He had multiple hanging dimes. So he jumps up as if he's going for that floater. And because he has more airtime than everyone else on the floor, he's able to deliver it to Onyeka for an easy dunk. This is all created from the fact that you have a guard who's a willing screener and a capable screener. Ochai can't do anything against Jalen once he gets downhill, and he's able to bully him and find that dunk for Onyeka Okongwu. So definitely want to see some more inverted pick and roll for Jalen Johnson. We saw it with Trae Young as well, although Trae didn't make contact on the screen. Here you're going to see Nikhil Alexander-Walker get downhill and feed it to Onyeka Okongwu, and then Jalen's going to drop the seam, draw it, and then kick it out and draw that foul. Big fan of what Jalen was putting on tape in terms of as a driver, right? So you see why the Hawks didn't always want Trey to bring the ball up the court. It's because the ball pressure he has to see. But this is the benefit of that, right? So when that Trey pick and roll runs, or even from the very beginning, right, it involves three players into the action. You're going to see Darko Rajakovic tell Grady Dick, hey, we need you here just in case Onyeka rolls. When Onyeka doesn't roll, but instead just kind of mucks up the spacing here by sort of setting an off-ball screen. He is setting an off-ball screen on Jalen Johnson's man, Scotty Barnes. Also, Scotty steps back on Mamu's foot. He's off balance, and then that's all Jalen needs to take off and finish with the contact and one. Let's talk through this right here. So Trey's going to take a deep three. Trey does he takes these for 2-for-1 opportunities, but this is the problem, right? And this is why the Trey, I like that they have the double bigs on the floor, but you don't need two guys going to the offensive glass here, KP. I understand. I understand why you want to do it, but you can't do this. And this is something that he'll have to learn how to play with these guys, because if that shot misses, you can't have the furthest people down the court be Trey and Luke Kennard. This is barbecue chicken for the Raptors, and they're just going to run it, and Grady Dick gets a layup. So whether or not you feel like this is a good shot from Trey doesn't really matter. It's more so KP has to just be more aware where he needs to be on the floor. The opportunity of him getting this offensive rebound with Onyeka already stationed there, probably not high. I would have loved for Onyeka to get a body here instead of just waiting for the ball, but it'll take time, especially from KP. He's got to adjust to playing with these guys. This is a good and important clip, though. You're going to see KP draw the attention of two people here. or really just draw attention of everyone in general. So this is the type of smart screening you see from guys like Dyson and Nikhil. Nikhil sees the advantage. The advantage is coming. Grady Dick doesn't know what the hell's going on. Jonathan Mongo sees it, but he doesn't want to close out. And so KP reads the floor balance really well, gets it to Luke Kennard, who touch passes it, barely touches his hands. And you could see why this team could be really impactful offensively. It creates an open three for Onyeka. Of course, the benefit of having two bigs who can shoot the ball, just it wasn't always clean in the half-court execution-wise because they kept getting turnovers. Here, Nikhil drives into a crowd, tries to draw a foul. Same issue here. Scotty's taking off and Jalen's watching. And now, guess who's all the way down the floor? Scotty Barnes. So, just got to be more aware there. Like, I think a lot of this is fixable. That's the good part. But you got to minimize the different disadvantages you're going to have here. So, Jalen has to just kind of be aware that if you're going to be attacking the mismatch, they might bring help. He turns his ball to the help. He slips. Now it's the Nikhil by himself. Dyson helps us back. This is a nasty play from Brandon Ingram, by the way. The fake pass off the catch makes Nikhil commit just enough to not be able to actually do anything there. You see a quick timeout for him. Quinn Snyder, he used a lot of timeouts. In fact, the Hawks had to use their mandatory. They were down to one timeout in the fourth quarter. So off-ball screen action from Brandon Ingram here. You're going to see him just completely shove Zachary Reed out the way. Now, I think Zach is capable of taking bumps. I think here he's off balance. It was well timed from Brandon Ingram. You don't see much protest from the Hawks at all because, again, same thing. He doesn't extend his arm. This is something that Jalen Johnson is going to have to learn. It's an essential score for any primary score, essential skill for any primary scorer. You can see how effective it is. And again, just a point that the Hawks don't have the best size and or strength combination at that three spot. So even with Zach on the floor. I like Zach being comfortable enough to try a little bit something here against Brandon Ingram. He gets off the ball quickly, and then he still flows into motion. Notices that Brandon goes under, and there's no hesitation on the pull-up three. They're going to need him to take these and make these. Now, this possession is important for a couple reasons. First off, the fact that the Hawks are able to manufacture an open look for Trey without a screen at the rim didn't happen much last year. Some of that was the Achilles. Some of that was a lack of spacing they had. But the fact that they have Jalen up the floor on the opposite side, they have KP and Zach in the corners, and then they have Dyson in the dunker spot, it's hard for anyone to help off. Now, Trey doesn't take the best angle on this drive, in my opinion. When he gets to step on RJ, you've either got to extend. He's got to go as quickly as possible, or he needs to jump back into him. You got to either go into the path or extend the path, and he kind of slows down without creating that separation with the bump. Again, he isn't the biggest guy, but even if you do lean and then bump back, you have a better chance of him making this. Now he has to make it over his outstretched arms. It's just a tougher shot. But the bigger thing is more so what happens after the shot. They're pushing in transition, and same thing, man. Just it's a numbers game. Because Dyson goes for the offensive rebound, which I don't have a problem with. It's completely fine. It would have been nice if he was able to get it, but you've got guys just sort of jogging on their way back, and really well-timed Gortat screen from Jakob Poeltl in transition. So once Scotty's able to get around Jalen, it's an open dunk. I want to highlight this pass from Jalen Johnson off of a slip screen from Zachary Reed. This is how Zach can take advantage of his movement. So first he speeds up to get Scotty a little bit scared for that opening pass, and then he slows down, modulating the pace. Then he relocates to the corner, which allows Dyson to set that pin-in screen, and it's an open three created by Jalen's driving, Zach's off-ball movement, and Dyson's off-ball screening. And that's a repeatable form for success, right? You can generate offense without having Trey on the ball, but it's going to take movement. It's going to take screening. It's going to take driving from someone. That someone will be Jalen or Dyson. The movement will be Regis or KP. And so it's repeatable, but it's going to be hard, of course, to defend and create offense when you always turn the ball over. So here's another good example of a pretty bad turnover. I'm not mad at this attempt. I just think the ball probably should have been a little bit faster. You've got to swing this pass faster. He picking the ball up allows RJ to play the overhead pass. He knows where the vulnerability is. It's either going to be an overhead pass here or it's going to be an overhead pass here. And because of that, ball gets turned over. And this is just unacceptable. I talked about this in the opener. How is Jakob Poeltl going full court and throwing an alley-oop? Like, I can't remember if Quinn called a timeout after this, but I would have been furious. Because here's the thing. I've seen Trey go for steals in the past. You're telling me you're not going to try and stop ball? Like, I know that this – I understand. I promise I do. But you have to stop ball before anything else. You defending the guy who doesn't have the ball doesn't do anything. You just took yourself out the play, and there's no longer a factor. And it was a bad defensive performance from most people. I didn't like what I saw from Trey. The effort was there on some plays, and it was really bad on others. Inverted pick and roll opportunity here for the Hawks. So it's just, using a guard. Now, even though Trey doesn't make contact on the screen, I do want to call out that even pantomiming a screen creates an advantage. You see how Manuel quickly's mouth opens here? It's because he's calling out for a screen. You're going to see Scotty's footwork change slightly. Like he's anticipating a screen. You see he jumps back. He's anticipating that screen on his right side. And then he's out of position. Once Jalen rejects that screen, now Scotty has to wrap him up a little bit recklessly. I don't like that he pulled down on his arm. Of course, Jalen had that shoulder injury, but he finishes through contact. Big shot. Nice. I like the Selly too. Okay, so this is after Zach hurt his ankle. Zach twisted his ankle on a transition opportunity, and I like this activity from the Keel defensively. This is what you're going to have when people are going to try to hunt mismatches against Trey. You're going to need people to show, recover quickly, pass off assignments. And this is my example of just like how it's a little bit of a better effort from Trey, right? I'm not asking him to be a defensive world beater, but at least make the effort to get back out to that rotation. Like it was probably late enough to where like if Scotty swung this ball, they would have had that advantage, but Zach was still able to force him into a travel, even with his ankle tweaking. This is the low point, I think, for the Hawks. I have in my notes rebounding is going to be a problem this season. On this right here, Brandon Ingram's next at rebound right over Onyeka. And part of this is because they were so worried about Jakob Poeltl. I think that this is the value of having a top-tier rebounder, but Onyeka has to be aware of who's on his backside because the Hawks gave up a lot of offensive rebounders that look just like that. This right here, I believe this turns into a shot off. Yeah, no dip three from Zach. But when you're not able to get the long rebound, it's going to turn into a transition opportunity. So here, Kennard, I almost feel like Onyeka could have shouted that a little bit more. I like that they got back. But unfortunately, man, like this is just a problem when you have both Trey and Luke on the floor. I like that at least they have Zach and Jalen, but someone else has to get back besides them. Otherwise, it's not going to be much. Another offensive rebound, long rebound that got tipped out. Grady Dick gets it back. Falls into an open three for Brandon Ingram. Another rebound. I like that Jalen tried to high point this, but he's not able to get it quite. It's kind of like when the bleeding just started and didn't stop. What I like about this possession, Trey flows into a screen or at least a slip screen for KP. It forces a switch. KP needs to turn this to a mismatch opportunity. You shouldn't be driving it against a guard. And then Trey just sort of sits there and watches. At this point, the vibes were done, and the Hawks pretty much lost the game, to be honest, at this point. Of course, transition was a huge, huge problem. But generally speaking, I do think that there are some positive takeaways. I think they were able to get to the paint much easier than they have in the past. I think that there was a semblance of rim protection with KP on the floor. I think that Jalen was a standout as a pick and roll operator, as an overall creator. Offensively, there were some good moments with Zach and Trey on the floor, or Trey and Luke on the floor. The Keel showed some defensive upside or defensive ability in general. But generally speaking, this is going to be a problem for them against bigger teams if they're not going to be able to outshoot them. They weren't able to outshoot them last night, and they weren't disciplined enough defensively to make up that gap. Against Orlando, they're going to have to shoot the ball a lot better. They're going to want to have any chance. If Zach's going to be limited, I think he's questionable for tomorrow's game. It's going to be even tougher because he is their only wing-sized player. I think Jacob Toppin needs to be active and needs to be played if the Hawks are going to go into Orlando without Zachary Ricochet. If not, it could be tough. I wasn't a big fan of Quinn's rotation in this one. I don't understand why Keaton Wallace was in the top 8. I know that Dyson was in foul trouble, but it doesn't necessitate having Keaton Wallace on the floor. I think that Quinn was maybe a little bit too worried about the ball handling drop-off and overall point of attack defense drop-off. I think the better option there, in my opinion, was to play Zach more than the 5 minutes he did in the first 17, 18 minutes of the game. And maybe play Vit Krejci. Those would have been my first buttons I would have pressed. I think I understand why Quinn did that. I just don't think it was a good idea, especially sticking with it when it clearly was not working. And you definitely can't do Keaton, Trey, and Luke. You can't do 3-guard lineups with this team. It just won't work. It should never happen. There's too much size, at least in terms of relative to their position on this roster. And if you're going to do that, please just go double big. They've got better options in the front court. They got better options in the back court. I didn't really expect Keaton Wallace to play in the regular season unless there were injuries, to be honest with you. And I should have known with the 1-year contract. I saw some people mention Mo Geisha played. The thing about Mo is he said that he hasn't played with KP. He didn't play much in preseason with any of the starters. So I think they don't view him as like a viable rotation guy right now, at least right now. So I just hope that Quinn can trust maybe Jacob Toppin in these particular matchups against Orlando instead of Keaton Wallace. The size, the defense, the attacking off the catch, the rebounding, particularly, like that would really help. And so we'll see what Quinn does. We'll see how the Hawks adjust. And I'll see y'all right after that game. Y'all be safe.